Morning, everybody. Sweaty Mondays. And welcome to the news agenda with me, a very tired Fleet Street Fox, because I couldn't sleep. It was so hot. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's editor, Alison Phillips. Morning, Alison.
Good morning, Susie. So apart from being hot, are you well?
I'm well, apart from just shattered.
Yes.
But, you know, it just makes me short-tempered and gripey. So
all that sun that we've been waiting for the last 10 months, you mean that's what making you grumpy?
It's making me very grumpy. It's just too sunny. I want to go back to spring again. Now, this is the People's Pay-Per-View, so get into the comments. Ask us your questions about the big issues of the day that are burning a hole in your head. We will do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast are just going to have to open all the windows and pray for rain. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on 3 missing British divers after a boat caught fire off the Red Sea coast of Egypt. Now, keep an eye on the website for updates on that during the day. Hopefully they will be able to find them. But what I want to discuss today is 2 very different and yet strangely really similar political stories. So first off, in Scotland, the former First Minister, ex-leader of the SNP, arguably, whatever you think of her, the most successful female politician of her generation in terms of the longevity and continued popularity, which is something most politicians just don't maintain, Nicola Sturgeon has been arrested. So, Alison, take us through this. What do we know that she was suspected on suspicion of?
Well, this all goes back into a rather long-running and complicated problems that they've been having at the SNP. So back in about 2016, they decided they were going to do a bit of fundraising to get some money for the referendum that they've obviously long been hoping for. And over a period of time, they got to something, I think it was £666,000. But then in some of the most recent accounts, it wasn't clear where that money had gone. And there's been all sorts of shenanigans as attempts are made to find out where the money's gone. You'll remember that Nicola Sturgeon's husband, he was arrested earlier in the year, very shortly after she resigned from her post as leader of the SNP. And since then, there's this long-running police investigation into what's really happened. So we don't know whether Nicola Sturgeon has been interviewed as a witness, perhaps, or actually as a suspect, or what it all means. But it certainly is casting a shadow over, like you say, what was an incredible period in office.
It was, wasn't it? And it's kind of strange. So there's these sort of financial questions being asked about the SNP money. And it's worth pointing out they'd had a referendum when they decided to fundraise for this. They'd had a referendum in 2014. A couple of years later, they decided to fundraise for another one because they weren't happy with the result. And the question is what it was used on. Sturgeon's husband was in charge of that, not her. So whether she's a witness to something they think someone else might have done, or whether she's a suspect, like I say, we don't really know. But her enemies sort of potentially jumping on the wish to have thought that she may have committed some kind of major wrongdoing herself, aren't they?
Yeah. And then we remember there was the £100,000 motorhome which was seized from outside her mother-in-law's house as well. So there's lots of things that all look like they probably need to be looked at thoroughly, which is hopefully what the police in Scotland are doing. Where it all leaves, where it leaves the SNP, probably in ruins, regardless of the outcome.
Well, that's it. She's got a successor. She's got Humza Yousaf, who's now the new First Minister of Scotland. I mean, he's poor bloke. I mean, if you feel sorry for Rishi Sunak, then I mean, Humza's really having a hell of a few months. So, what's this actually doing to politics in Scotland? We don't get a lot of coverage of this kind of issue necessarily in England. It doesn't happen in the national media quite the same way that it does up north.
Well, I think Nicola Sturgeon was already an incredibly divisive character. So there were some people who loved her. And I thought during COVID, she was a really great communicator. Every day she was out there speaking to the people of Scotland about COVID and what was happening. But there were an awful lot of people during that period who just wanted to stop talking and to go away, and they felt that she was way too cautious and that her severe lockdowns really damaged the economy. So incredibly divisive character. And then, of course, when things go wrong around divisive characters, there's lots of people who want to use those to cause trouble. So she left. Hamza Yusuf took over. He was on the Laura Kuenssberg show yesterday morning saying that he thought all was well with Nicola Sturgeon, she was all okay. And then, literally minutes later, she was getting arrested.
Oh dear, Hamza. Perhaps don't speak. Might be easier. Mike says Keir Starmer has had worse weeks.
Yes,
so he's doing quite happily, isn't he? Because the Labour obviously needs to win Scotland if they're going to take over in Westminster. But what's this doing to? I mean, Nicola and the SNP's long sort of dream of independence, because so much of it hung on the personalities, didn't it? First of Alex Salmond, then of her. Alex Salmond's gone. Well, his integrity's down the pan. Nicola's looks like it's in some danger. What does that do to the independence question?
I think the polls are certainly showing that the appetite for independence is waning. And I think probably if there was a moment to really go for that referendum, it surely was in the immediate aftermath of Brexit, when not many Scottish people were in favour of Brexit. They saw the value of wanting a connection with the European Union. So that was the moment probably to have gone for it. But then it was deemed too soon after the last referendum. So it's going to be very difficult. And I think at the moment, when most people in this country, whether north or south of the border, are pretty much worried about paying the energy bills and paying for the fast food inflation, I think independence obviously has slipped down their list of priorities.
Yeah, I'm speaking as someone from a country that's recently split from someone else. I don't want to split up again. It's like the second relationship. Like, no, I'm really going to invest in this one, and let's try to make it work. Yeah. Deborah says, I don't think any politicians can lie straight in bed. It's scary these people are trusted with our futures. I've often said this, Deborah, and it's remarkable. There are no entry qualifications to being an MP or politician of any sort. Partly that's so that you can elect just about anybody, because it should be democratic. And partly that also means that sometimes they couldn't answer a multiple choice morality quiz on what you should do with someone else's money.
The only thing I would say is I do think there are some politicians who go into politics because they want to make, either their local area, their constituency a better place, or they want to make the country a better place. I really do believe a lot of them go in with the very best of intentions. And then I'm not sure whether it's the system or whether it's power, or whether it's just the kind of people who are interested in power are more kind of vulnerable to make mistakes. But I do think a lot of people, and there are still good politicians out there, there really are. But then we do keep coming across these situations. The only thing I do think is, there's that great line about we get the politicians we deserve. I do think there's a truism there, and I think if, as a country, we paid more attention to what they were doing, we're more engaged with doing. If when we had kids, we actually wanted them to grow up to be a politician, whereas I couldn't do anything worse than my kids. If we actually valued it as a thing that we thought was great, then we might get a better product at the end of it.
Yes, but of course, valuing it means people that do it make a good fist of it to start with, and that's the only way you'd value it. And so it's catch 22. Well, I do think anyone who says they want their children to be a politician when they grow up is probably going to get social services round. If you say it publicly, it's not a good idea. But like you said, there are so many politicians on all sides that do a really good job, and they kind of get.
I know. And we have to remember that
because they're all liars when they're not all like that. It's just the ones we tend to see and notice.
Yeah. And that's what Karen's saying, yes.
Yeah, people who want the power think about themselves, not what's good for the country. It's one of those things, isn't it? It's like if you stand for election, you should be automatically disqualified for it because plainly you want power. It should be like jury service. You just get randomly selected from the public. And oh, God, I've got to go.
And also, the very brightest kids in this country aren't going into politics. They're just not. That is a reality. They're going into, whatever new industries are going. Yeah. And so as a result, we're sort of left with people who have probably got, an obsessive interest in politics.
Well, I was having a discussion with some Brexit voters yesterday who're significantly older than me. I won't give you a clue who they were, but they were like, what's wrong with all politicians? They're all just dreadful. And I tried to point out it's because of the Brexit referendum. And this isn't a thing about Brexit, but because the people that supported the Brexit referendum and fought for Brexit in politics were the fringe. They were on the edges. They didn't have the experience of power, and they were a little bit. And people then voted for Brexit. Those were the people you got running the country, and you just got in amateur hour, and you got people who hadn't been just scrutinised properly. So they didn't know how to use power, and they didn't know the cost of wielding it in terms of the media attention and everything else. And you just. Anyway, Mike says, can anyone explain how a 30-year-old attractive blonde who only graduated from university in 2015 with no other qualifications or experience apart from you at Johnson's side earned a place for life in the Lords? I think this is one of the least corrupt suggestions from Boris Johnson for a peerage after he left office. Now, there's things in the House of Lords. Okay, I know someone who worked for a minister for a period and then got made a peer, and she's in there as a working peer. So she's doing the tasks and the jobs and the politics, if you like, that she was doing when she was working alongside someone as a civilian. But she's in the House of Lords to help push things. And although she's a Conservative peer, that friend of mine, she's working cross-party, she's being cooperative, she's in there as someone who knows how to wield the levers of power, if you like. So I would suggest that, seeing as Boris Johnson put forward, I think it was 15 names for his peerages list, didn't he? And unprecedentedly, normally maybe 1 in 10 would get knocked off. Half of them got knocked off, right? He only got 8 through. And I would suggest that not only is that an unprecedented number, but the rest of them are probably unprecedentedly corrupt. The ones who did get through were probably the cleanest, Mike.
Yeah, but the whole system, I mean, yes, Boris Johnson has taken advantage of the system, but the system is there to be taken advantage of. So it's the system that's wrong, isn't it? I mean, the whole thing just stinks, doesn't it? So not only have we got this sort of ridiculousness over the weekend, we've still yet to hear Liz Truss's resignation on it. I mean,
I can't wait for that one.
The very idea of a woman that was in office, what was it, about a month, who just created absolute carnage during that month, has any opportunity to send anybody to the House of Lords or any resignations. It's just ludicrous.
No, there should be like minimum service levels, and unless you hit them, you don't get to have your resignation.
Or just get rid of the whole ludicrous House of Lords system and start again with a proper second assembly.
Well, yes, but then we'd end up with people voting for Boris Johnson to go in the House of Lords for 10 years. I mean, that did happen. He was very popular. Do we want that?
Yeah.
Paul said people voted for Hitler, remember? People buy Coldplay records. You can't trust them. Paul said, when is your police mob going to chase Moan and all the rest who stole taxpayers' money? I believe she's under some kind of investigation at present. So my police mob, if I could direct it at anybody, which last time I checked, I can't, doesn't need directing at Michelle Moan. I think she is already under some investigation. So let's leave that one there. Now, quickly, we need to sort of segue on to the next story. Now, when Sturgeon resigned, she swore blind she had no idea that her husband was about to be arrested when she resigned. Now, she's been arrested, released without charge, we should say. She's issued a statement saying how devastated she is and that she's cooperating with the inquiry. She seems quite content to let the legal process run its course. I think you probably know where I'm going with this one. She's not questioning the process, is she, Alison? She's upholding the institution. She's cooperating. She's saying, yes, this is all fine.
And somebody isn't. That's what we're saying. Somebody isn't. Also over the weekend, it was a busy old weekend, Boris Johnson has come out in an absolute state of fury with his final parting statement, where he says it's all a kangaroo court, the privileged committee which was looking into him. And I just think it's I mean, I know you might say I would say this, but I cannot bear now. It's like footballers who can never ever accept anything a referee says they don't agree with. They think it's some dreadful travesty of justice. Our society has become such that no one ever just seems to be able to accept when they've told off or when they've done something wrong or when they're in trouble. And it's exactly the same. He absolutely refuses to accept he's done everything else. And I think by calling into question the committee that have come up with the report, which presumably is pretty damning, otherwise he wouldn't have quit. I just think it undermines the whole system. It's actually in some ways worse than what he's done, which is just as what was actually worse than the parties he had is the fact that he lied to Parliament. It's when you try to break the rules that are there, because if in a society everybody doesn't play by the same rules, then you're in crisis. Just like in a football match, if some of the players don't want to play by the rules and just say it's an absolute sham if they're found to be doing something they don't think they should. And I just think it's a really, really unhealthy situation where no one just seems to be able to take a judgment on the chin and move on with it. They've got to whinge and whine like some overgrown toddler who just needs to suck it up and move on.
Yeah. Nicely said, Alison. Can I read you a letter? This was sent some time ago. I think it was 1982. So what's that? 43 years?
Yeah.
44 years? 41 years, sorry. Boris has really adopted a disgracefully cavalier attitude to his classical studies. Boris sometimes seems affronted when criticised for what amounts to a gross failure of responsibility and surprised at the same time he was not appointed captain of the school for next half. I think he honestly believes that it is churlish of us not to regard him as an exception, one who should be free of the network of obligation which binds everybody else. Written about Boris Johnson when he was, I think, at Eton, so early adolescence. And you could say that, I mean, Harriet Harman could have written exactly the same thing in her report, for all we know, couldn't she? Because show me the boy and show me the man. That's exactly who we've got.
That's
someone
exactly
who thinks he should be an exception.
And it's really sort of disappointing, as I suppose perhaps his teacher may have said. It's really disappointing that somebody who has reached the highest office in the land doesn't show even a small amount of humility that, you know, he may have done something wrong and that it's not all a plot against him. And of course, it is, again, very Trumpian. It's very much in that kind of mold of the strong men of politics who we've seen, you know, increasingly all over the world, where it's very much the cult of the personality, but nothing can be done to question that personality because it's all about them. And they just do not believe that the usual rules for the rest of us apply to them. And so I think he is legitimately confused when he's told, no, you can't do that, because he can't understand why he can't do that, because he's always done whatever he wants. So it's just very, very disappointing. And I think that's why it's so important that the rest of us push back and say, no, these are the rules, and these are the rules everyone has to play around. But the worry, of course, is that he's already garnering support, perhaps to do, you know, to come back at some point in the future. And there are those who just seem to forgive him anything.
Yeah, I mean, as we said, we've got some comments coming up there, calling him a crook and a Russian asset, saying that he's got to take the questions that are part of his job. And that he lied to the Queen. Of course, he prorogued Parliament illegally.
I mean, he lied to the Queen. I mean, that was really early on in the whole thing, when he prorogued Parliament.
That was like day one.
Outrageous what he did at that point. But, you know, everyone just sort of said, oh, well. And then it just sort of shrugged their shoulders and moved on. And that's why, at least this time, it really feels he's being held to account for his behaviour.
Well, is he though?
Well,
he's run away, hasn't we? So let's just go back over this, all right? This is the parliamentary inquiry into whether Boris misled Parliament over the COVID lockdown parties. And it's just precedent. You just do not lie to Parliament. And lying doesn't just involve saying something untrue, because things can later turn out to be untrue when you didn't think they were. It involves knowing it's untrue and then saying it anyway. And this inquiry, which he calls a kangaroo court and undemocratic, right, was set up by him when he was Prime Minister. It was so undemocratic, it was actually voted for, its rules are voted for by Parliament. Members of the committee who had criticised him recused themselves, so they weren't part of it. And it had a Conservative majority on it. So it was as loaded in Boris's favour as it was possible for that to be, and they still found against him. And
not only that, I mean, yesterday in some of the things that were being written, they were really, really spinning against Bernard Jenkin MP, who is, you know, not some kind of wokey, trendy lefty. He is a bastion of the Conservative Party, and now he's sort of being he's out there to stitch him up. It's everything must be a plot. Everything must be an attempt to undo Boris and to undo Brexit. When in actual fact, what if it is he did wrong, and his committee have done an investigation, and they have shown that he has done wrong. And but like you say, they just don't want to hear that.
No, they don't want to, and there are some people actually supporting this and not really pointing it out very clearly. So PJ says, can Johnson evade appearing at the COVID inquiry? No, PJ, because like the committee, he set it up as a statutory inquiry. That means it's governed by legislation, which has been in existence and has not been one of the things he didn't tinker with when he was Prime Minister, which does mean that they have the power to compel any evidence they want and any witness they want. So Baroness Hallett has him. So when are we going to see this report, do we think, Alison? It's going to be published anyway. I mean, we are all going to know what they've found out, aren't we? He hasn't avoided that.
It seems to be sort of imminent. I think they're meeting today, because now, obviously, the committee are cross that he's come out and called them a kangaroo court, as you would be, because that's massively undermining for them, to the point where I'd be quite interested if they were able to take legal action on that, because essentially that's saying that they're corrupt. So, and he's also had personal attacks at Harriet Harman, the chair. I mean, the only thing you do wonder is if, to avoid this sort of thing happening, not because I think they didn't do the job properly, but to avoid people then coming in and saying, oh, it's all dodgy, is whether you do get an independent committee to look at it. I don't know. And also, I think the whole thing that he's been able to come out and blame Sue Gray, who led the Sue Gray inquiry into the parties at the beginning, the top civil servant, because she's now going to work for Keir Starmer. I think that was madness that Labour had given Johnson the opportunity to question the Sue Gray report by giving Sue Gray a job. I just think that was silly.
Well, I don't think it really changed an awful lot of opinions about what happened, because whether you blame Sue Gray, whether you blame Harriet Harman, whether you blame Bernard Jenkin, or, you know, the stars being out of alignment, or it's all a big conspiracy to stop Boris, which I dare say is what he would have told his Eton headmaster when he got caught out goosing the maid as well. He's the one who opened his mouth and said the words.
He is. I think
who held the champagne glass aloft.
But while rational, sensible people can see it like that, what increasingly I think we have to do nowadays is sort of think not just what's right and what's wrong, but how is somebody going to try and undermine what you've just said, and then make sure that you give them as little opportunity to undermine you as possible, because that is what Johnson and Trump and all these people are absolutely brilliant at doing. Sowing enough doubt that the truth starts to look really confusing to people. They cause enough chaos that ordinary people just get so lost they don't know what's true and what's not anymore. And people fighting against people like Trump and Johnson have got to have a better strategy at being able to show their workings out and to show that they are completely and utterly above board.
Yeah. Now, Daniel says, all the missing money connected to Boris Johnson, did they ever find the 50 million that wasn't spent on the London Garden Bridge? No, Daniel, because it was spent on it. It was spent on studies and inquiries and investigations and drawings. It just got wasted. There was no bridge, but there was plenty of money that went down the pan, unfortunately. Now, when they do, tell us what you think, everybody. Do you think Boris Johnson's being treated unfairly? Do you think this is just all a bit much? Well, now he's resigned, we just need to forget about it. Or do we need to hunt him down and actually hold him to account somehow? Jones says, we just have a corrupt Conservative Party. Boris was the best Prime Minister of all the Conservatives. Oh, Joan, I don't know. If you want to say he was the best Prime Minister because he got Brexit done, there's that argument, okay? But then the Brexit we've got is one that people who voted for Brexit hate. It's not working. And if you think Brexit was amazing, then he was the one who was in charge of it. He literally led a coup against Theresa May, so he would be in charge of it. And then we've got a really bad Brexit.
But he did get Brexit done. And for a lot of people who felt that for years under Theresa May, there was just a lot of faffing around, he did achieve that. And I think whatever you may think of Brexit, he did get that done. And but it came after that, I think.
He got it done by cocking up Northern Ireland peace process, by lying to people, by not spending the money on the NHS whatsoever, taking it out, and delivering a Brexit that was so bad.
There's a lot of people who
GDP.
I know, but I think a lot of people were just wanting to get Brexit done at that point, and they just wanted somebody to grab hold of it and do it, and that is what he did, regardless of the.
He did do it, but it's like saying, well, at least Al Capone got the banks to give our money back to us, only because he robbed them or whatever. It's just, Anyway, John says people remember not being able to say goodbye to loved ones, with him and his ilk partying at number 10. Quite right, John. And Alison, I just want you to stop and think for a moment. This was the Mirror. It was Pippa Crerar, formerly this parish, who exposed the lockdown stuff. And I texted over the weekend and I said, bloody hell, Pippa, you've killed a prime minister. How do you feel about that, Alison? I mean, it's your paper. You brought him down. You've done all this. It's your fault. You're the conspiracy.
But when that did break on Friday evening, I think I did sort of feel that he's been made to not sort of pay the right word, but he's been held accountable for his actions, which I've always felt during the whole of that Partygate situation, some people thought, oh, what a big fuss about nothing. It's just a couple of glasses of wine, da 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 da. And that kind of summed up those people's attitudes towards lockdown. And then other people, like the gentleman who messaged in earlier, and also like my best friend whose father died during that period, are still absolutely raging that they had precious moments taken away from them, that they were not able to spend with somebody they loved. And the interesting thing is, it's not just anger they weren't there, they also feel a tremendous amount of guilt that they weren't there. And they kind of think, what kind of a mug was I that I didn't go and see my dad when they were all there having parties? And that's kind of, then they sort of start blaming themselves. And that the very idea that those people in power have made ordinary people in this country feel angry and guilty and hurt for letting down the people they love. He deserved to be held accountable for that. He deserved to be held responsible for breaking the laws that he introduced. And he lied to Parliament. And we cannot underestimate the importance of truth, because once we lose the importance of truth, our entire society falls apart. Everything falls apart. And so I am really pleased he's gone, because he deserves. We tell our kids, when we're having children, we tell our kids, you've got to tell the truth. You've got to do the right thing. And then they look around and they see adults and the people in the most powerful people in the country not telling the truth. What kind of society are we? So I'm delighted he's gone for those reasons.
Yeah. And I think as well, the fact that we had someone in there who didn't tell the truth, that's exactly, Deborah says, long live the Mirror.
Thank you, Deborah.
We need that at the moment. It just shows, when you have someone who's not telling the truth at the top, the damage that gets done to the systems all the way through. It's not, it's just not very good at all. So Boris Johnson is supposedly going to be due to resign today, which he'll apply for the manor of Northstead or the Chiltern
Hundreds or something.
There's some medieval rigmarole they've got to go through. But there's going to be 3 by-elections. There's some talk about whether he will go to another seat and stand there. The problem with that is that if he goes back into Parliament, they'll just suspend him for 10 days. So the punishment they've got, which was to suspend him for 10 days, sparking a by-election, if he goes back into Parliament, whether it's next week or whether it's in 10 years' time, that punishment is still sitting there waiting for him.
So that's still, I didn't realise that. So that still stands, even if. So what's the benefit to him then of going for a different seat?
None whatsoever, which is why he's not going to do it. It's just something that I think his supporters keep talking about and going, well, he'll come back. I mean, Jacob Rees-Mogg at the weekend, Sir Jacob
Rees-Mogg.
Sir, what? His lordship, Jacob Rees-Mogg, said at the weekend that Boris is now in pole position to be leader of the Tory party. He's not. He can never be leader again because he can't.
I don't know. I'm not so sure about that. I'm really not. So supposing, if you think, there's an election sometime between now and like the end of 2024. Imagine the Conservatives lose. They'll all tear themselves apart in some awful kind of feeding frenzy. At which point, a significant number of them will say, right, it's time to bring back Boris. He can win. And to be fair to him, he does win. He does win stuff. He won the referendum. He won a huge landslide victory. He does win stuff. What he's not so good at is the responsible, difficult bit of actually leading.
But the election he won in 2019, the landslide, was only 300,000 more votes than Theresa May, who did quite badly. So it was only where he won the votes that mattered. And, Leslie says, do you think more Conservative MPs will resign? I think, Leslie, we had, after Boris Johnson stood down, we're overrunning, but this is just too good to stop. After Boris Johnson stood down, there was lots of talk about how he was going to lead rebellions from the backbenches. There was votes that he wasn't going to go for, and he was going to get all his supporters to pull votes as well. There were like 2 people that voted with it.
That's it. He's not the powerhouse that he once was. And also, you've got to remember, all MPs, those MPs, they've got a mortgage to pay. They've got, kids to put through expensive private schools. I expect.
Got mistresses to quiet.
Exactly. Yeah. They're not all going to sort of on some terrible point of principle for somebody who may not be able to offer them any long-term future. A lot of them were just thinking, I better just keep my head down and it will all blow over.
Yeah, unless you're Dean Dorries and you just resign and snit.
But I don't think you can ever underestimate what Boris may do yet.
No, he's obviously going to cause trouble for everybody. Yes. But I think if he did come back in, if Tories lose the next election and he comes back in as a potential leader of the opposition, which he would be quite good at, right? Because it's just throwing brick back. That's easy to be leader of the opposition. The trouble is that he would come back into a parliament where Labour would be presumably in the majority, and therefore the Privileges Committee would have a Labour majority on it, and therefore they're going to keep that punishment on the side burner. But if he does come back in, the only way he'd get back in is if the Privileges Committee decide they don't want to punish him again, which would be a Tory majority.
It's interesting. Who knows what
is bad? But let's be honest, okay, everybody. He did not resign, everybody, because it was a kangaroo court or an undemocratic court, or because it was tainted by Harriet Harman. He resigned because he was facing a fresh police inquiry over lockdown parties, which people haven't seen much this week.
So the fresh police inquiry, we've got what presumably is a pretty damning report from the Privileges Committee, and we've also got the COVID inquiry starting now.
Yeah.
And he has probably got a pretty good idea about how bad some of the stuff that's going to come out in that is as well.
Well, presumably he's glanced over his WhatsApp since he's handed them in. I don't know, maybe he hasn't. He resigned.
There's still the missing phone, isn't there, that we don't know about.
Exactly. So he resigned because he's facing police inquiry. He's got the COVID inquiry coming up where he's probably going to have to give evidence fairly soon. It's not going to go very well. He resigned because the committee he set up, and which had a Tory majority on it and loaded in his favour, still thought he lied to Parliament. We've heard somehow over the weekend, there's been reports that they increased his penalty because not only did they think he lied to Parliament, but he lied to the committee under oath while trying to pretend he hadn't lied to Parliament. Just made it so much worse. He amplified the problem. He resigned because there was a poll out on the day that he resigned saying that he was going to lose his seat in Uxbridge. So he couldn't face the electorate. He couldn't face Parliament because they'd have had to vote on his penalties. He couldn't face the inquiry. And he's just managed to make the whole thing worse. He's resigned because he's the kind of person who can lie to Parliament, lie to the Privileges Committee, and then lie another 3 times in his resignation letter and still thinks that he's the one who's been hard done by because, of course, he's not a liar. He couldn't face the consequences of his own actions. And that's one of the things we teach our children is now, it's not what we're supposed to, or encourage the other people around us, whether you're committing a crime, whether you're stealing a stereo, whether you're shoplifting, you face the consequences of it. You just say, sorry, I did that.
I mean, none of this is a surprise, is it? So, I mean, you look at how he's treated all the women in his life. You look at how he's treated friends. There is a common theme throughout his life of doing stuff, not taking responsibility and treating other people poorly. And that is exactly what he's done to the British public.
Yeah. I would give good money just to have an interview with any one of his wives.
Oh,
no holds barred. Come on, cough and spill. That would be good. It's just the character of the man, isn't it? But I think character and politics have got a bit crushed up. Anyway, thank you for that. Thank you, everybody. What are your thoughts about Nicola Sturgeon and how it's going to look for independence in Scotland? Please don't talk about any potential crimes because she's been arrested and it's sort of in abeyance. But what do you think about what she's going to be facing? What do you think about Boris Johnson? Where can he come back? What's he going to do? Is he going to keep on bothering us? Or is his popularity, is he a legend in his own lunchtime? He's going to go back to being a newspaper columnist, and we all know what they're like, just full of it and not actually doing anything of any value to anybody else. I would like to say, although the Mirror is responsible for killing a prime minister, we are also the recipients of the only noble thing he did, which is give a medal to the nuclear test veterans postman's arrived. So thank you, Boris, for that one thing which you were forced to do, but I'm glad that we can take ownership of that because that was us too. Right, we need to move on to some good news. There is some in the world. We found it for you. Here it is. The postman's going to go in a minute. Now, we all know that cricket is a very slow sport, all right? And it takes a long time. But Keith Dibbs has been at it for 72 years, which is how long the average cricket match seems to last. Now, Keith, who is 88, is thought to be Britain's oldest cricket umpire. It's based in his native Yorkshire. And when he started out, they just played in a field of cows, and he had to move the cow pats before they could start play. Who stopped play, Alison? Is this proof that watching cricket really does stretch the fabric of space-time so that it lasts forever and ever and ever and ever?
I absolutely think it must. But I just think maybe cricket, because I mean, obviously I'm clearly don't really understand cricket, but
no one does. People who play cricket don't understand.
It doesn't appear to be massively sort of energetic. So maybe it is a perfect sport for people who are in their 80s and 90s and older. So you can just carry on playing it, umpiring it, and having a great time on those sunny afternoons.
Obviously, standing out in the sunshine and occasionally just doing this is the best way to take your exercise. You know, people who run marathons, they injure themselves, don't they?
Yeah, you don't want to be doing that. Yeah,
exactly. So, well done, Keith. Anyway, keep at it, and hopefully you'll get on to playing a second match sometime soon. That would be nice, wouldn't it? Now, have we got any questions to wrap with, or is this just about everything? Let's ask the gremlins in the back. Is there anything else, or is it no? That's just about it. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for taking part in that. Thank you, Alison, for neatly summing up.
Susie.
Boris Johnson, you should be on a parliamentary committee, and keep watching us later today, because I'm sure there'll be some more breaking stuff about whatever Boris is up to. Until then, we'll be back again on Wednesday for another edition of the news agenda. Till then, everybody, tatty bye.
See you.